really like the look of the front of this car, but there's a couple of things we need to do. We're going to increase boost. When you compress air, it makes heat. So the more you compress it, the hotter it gets. So to aid that, we're going to increase the airflow to the intercoolers out the side here. You saw in our previous video how the intercoolers are placed in the car, but we need to open up the opening. I was thinking of joining the top and bottom openings, but just worried it's going to look a bit weird. So we're going to nick these out, make them a little bit larger. Another thing, we've run an undertray on this previously, but because the car's so low, it got ripped off pretty quick and we've taken it off and never worried about it. Now the engine cooling's okay, but we want to put an undertray in there and then bleed some of that air off to cool the front brakes. The front brakes are copping a bit of a hard time now that we're pushing that a little bit harder. So we're going to remanufacture an undertray to seal up the area between the front of the bumper here and the back of the radiator, and then build some sides into it. I'll get the front bumper off, we'll get cutting, and we'll see what Vol can come up with for an undertray. Trying to fit two intercoolers, the radiator and everything else in the front of the car has obviously presented its own set of problems. And what we're dealing with now is where this intercooler runs up the side of the chassis. We've got just enough clearance with the 17-inch wheels that we've had on it. And on full lock they actually just rub on that silicone hose. But we're now going to an 18-inch wheel with an even wider tyre. So we need to generate as much room as we can to get these bigger tyres in the front of the car. We've made the decision to change the mounting of the intercooler just a bit to give us that little bit of extra room. And what that involves is we're going to scallop the chassis and put a section in there so that intercooler pipe will run halfway inside the chassis. So it should move it 2 1/4, 2.5 inches towards the inside of the car to allow for that wider tyre to turn while it's in the guard. It will also move the back side of the cooler here that little bit further away from the tyre, so as the tyre travels through its normal range of motion, it should have a little bit of clearance behind it. This is what we've come up with on the front of the chassis. We've trimmed that out and cut a radius in. We're about halfway through the chassis rail. Cut up a bit of tube, trimmed it up to make it fit, and we should be able to weld this back in place of the piece we've trimmed out to put the strength back in the chassis. And then that should allow us to run that intercooler up inside that bit of tube to give us the extra clearance we need to miss the front tyre. Unfortunately, we're missing a fabricator today, so I've got the dirty shirt on and I'm going to weld this in. I've just re-drilled the mounts on the intercooler and it's sitting in there pretty good at the moment. It's gone towards the center of the car, maybe 3 inches, which gives us more room for the tyre this way. And that scallop in the chassis has worked out pretty well. I've just taken that lower edge off just to give me a little bit more room. But that silicone hose now sits inside the chassis really neat. So we've probably gained 2.5 inches on that side as well. So as long as I can do the same on the other side, I think we've solved that issue and we can cross that job off the list. That did get out of hand pretty quickly, but we solved a lot of issues. We've got the intercoolers on now as a dummy fit, so we could try the front bar and see how it works. We've made a lot of work for ourselves. The intercoolers pipes don't really fit as well as they should, but we need to get this sorted. If we're going to go to the trouble of building an under tray, we at least want the front bar sitting right on the car, and it never really has sat properly on the car, and I've kind of hated it. It's one of those things. So now that they're on, we'll get the front bar on and we'll just see how it looks. Hopefully it's given us the adjustment we need to get it sitting right on the car. Lowell started cutting the fronts out. I think he's been a bit conservative. He's not here today, so I'll get it on the grinder and I'll cut that out a fair bit more. You can kind of see how none of the guards really line up, and it's always sat high at the front. It just looks bizarre. So I might even redo the mounting for the front guards, lift the front guards back up to try to get that gap right, and even this out, and then we can look at the under tray. It's dirty, dusty work, but it's got to be done. I've cut a lot more out of the front bar than we had before, and we're getting there. It's starting to fit how we're hoping. It's flat across the bottom. Front guards are still an issue, but we can work on that later. But what that means is now the front bar is where we want it. We can start on the frame of the under tray. The under tray is coming along nicely. He's finished the steel frame, and Miles has we've used an aluminium composite sheet on the bottom. So that is the bit that ties the sway bar mounts together, the steel brace at the back. It just goes up under the side like that. So now Miles is working on the sides, sheet them in. He's made some little adapters for the brake ducts to try to keep it nice and neat. We'll feed them under the intercooler pipe to keep it up against the chassis as tight as we can. The only real difference between this opening look like it's been hacked out by a grinder and looking half acceptable is just the details and just the rounded corners. And if I can follow the lines of, say, this opening with this opening, it'll look like it's meant to be. So just final trims now, using a die grinder to get the radiuses right and the sander to get some curves into it, and hopefully it won't look too bad. But we've opened that up a whole lot. And I'm really happy with the amount of extra airflow we'll be able to get to the cooler. Final trims now. Let's see how it turns out. Well, that was a whole lot more work than I thought it would be, but I really think we got the results we're after. Intercoolers have been relocated. We've moved them inboard to give us that little bit of extra room for a wider front tyre. The front bar now fits by far the best it ever has. Flat across the bottom, looks like it's supposed to be on the car, so I'm really happy with that. We've opened up the intakes for the intercoolers to increase the airflow through the intercoolers, and that, I believe that will make a big difference. We need to help reduce the intake charge temp as we increase the boost that little bit. I really think that's the key to getting that under control. Front under tray's in there, so it now seals the gap between the front of the bumper and the radiator. So the majority of the air that goes through this intake should now be pushed through the radiator. It will also develop a small amount of positive pressure. We will bleed some of that off to cool the front brakes. Small amount of downforce, but we're talking unmeasurable. Might make a bit of difference, but I doubt it very much. Why did we do all this work? To get a bigger front tyre under the car. These are the tyres we used to use. They're on a 17x8 rim, it's a 225 tyre. What we're going to now, 18 by 9.5 inch rim with a 250 tyre. So that little bit of extra tread, which will help us stop and turn the car. But what we're also going to do is put a bigger tyre on the rear of the car. So we need to keep that balance. If we end up with a really big rear tyre and a small front tyre, the back of the car will push the front of the car around. So we've got to keep that balance, and that's what we've worked out we needed to have. So missing piece of the puzzle. Obviously we need a set of rims. So our friends at Koya have hooked us up with a custom set of rims. Now these guys are great, we've dealt with them before, they're local to us. So all I've had to do is send them an email, tell them what I want, and they sent me out a set of rims. And before you get excited, we paid retail for these rims. We don't ask for a discount, we don't ask for special rates. They give us a quality product with great service, and we're more than happy to pay for that. So before all the haters start saying that we're getting free stuff and don't have to pay for theirs, well, it's not true. We pay just as much as anybody else, and we're happy to do so. So these only turned up today, so we better get one out of the box and see what it looks like when I can get it out of the box. We've got a little bit brighter colour as well, just to brighten up the side of the car. It had a whole lot of black on it before. But there it is. Brand new 18 by 9.5 inch rims for the front. So we'll get them on. Bit of a trial fit, just make sure they miss the brakes and everything else, but they're made to our measurements, so I'm really confident they'll be exactly what we're after.